This podcast uses adult language. Listener discretion is advised. This is Kevin.
And this is Elizabeth.
And this is the Lesson 83 podcast. Welcome back, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Kevin.
So we're going to start off tonight with a recording from a listener who wanted to get our opinion on something. So we're going to roll that first.
Hello, Elizabeth and Kevin. I am a huge fan of your podcast and actually have a question for you that I'm curious if you do an episode around. So I'm relatively new to poly, and one of the first connections I made was with a guy. We actually matched on a dating site, and I didn't realize this, but he was posting on behalf of a couple, him and his partner. His first photo was just him, and I loved what he wrote in his profile, so we matched. And then I realized after the fact that they were looking kind of on behalf of the two of them. But the guy was really interested in meeting. The three of us all met up twice, and he and I just had the most amazing chemistry. And so after the second time that we all three met up, his partner said it was fine if he and I went on a solo date. And a little background, he's been poly before, but him and his partner have been monogamous for almost, I think, like 9 months and are pretty serious, like talking about kids. They now live together. I think they're on track to be married as well. I'm heterosexual. I'm only interested in men and was extremely interested in this guy. One of the things that we bumped up against is, as a relationship norm, they both really like to share everything. At first, I thought it was kind of about like surveillance. That's what it felt like to me. But I think it's more just like how they connect. They really just share everything. And I tend to be much more private in intimacy. Like it feels like a really special thing that I share with another person. And it feels like really invasive and uncomfortable for everything to be shared with a non-participant in the romantic connection. So there were a couple times where he asked if he could share sexting of ours, which made me super uncomfortable. And he actually talked about an act of physical intimacy we shared with his partner without first asking for my consent. So I guess my question is, if I didn't feel this amazing connection, I would just move on. But I'm curious, is there a way to find a middle ground around this? This tension between privacy and intimacy and disclosure. My sense is maybe we're just not a match in this area if sharing is that important to them, but was really curious to hear your thoughts on kind of being flexible when partners have kind of a different philosophy around this. Thanks so much. Appreciate your thoughts.
First, I would want to say to make sure that you touch base with your partner. If they are going to be representing a couple in the future on dating apps, that should be overtly clear. It does sound like they're doing the right thing in that they are allowing for dating, it seems, outside of just dating the couple as a package deal, which is great. And if you haven't already, you might want to check out our episode on unicorn hunting. I believe it's episode 2. That will give you a much better sense of what similar circumstances might be like. But let's talk more about the privacy and disclosure. All right. So Elizabeth, it seems like you and I kind of handle these sorts of situations differently.
I feel that relationships work best with trust, of course. And so if she's used to having a certain degree of privacy, she should feel comfortable expressing that to her partner. If he isn't comfortable with her having that level of privacy, then maybe they should recalibrate where they are regarding like what kind of information is shared. But I'm also not shaming people who share a lot of information with their partners, especially their spouses. A lot of people have really open communicative dynamics like that. I basically feel like there's nothing wrong with wanting to have things kind of private in your personal relationships, and that she should at least feel comfortable asking her partner for that. And where it goes from there is kind of dependent on a lot of factors. But I guess I lean more in the privacy direction of things, maybe.
I really agree with that take, and I feel like that's really good advice. But I think you and I found it interesting in discussing this topic before we came on air of how you and I generally handle similar circumstances fairly differently.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, I try to warn my partners early in the relationship that information shared with me, unless they explicitly state so, might be shared with my other partners, mostly because I just enjoy sharing information with my partners and geeking out about new people I'm dating or talking about what I did with my day with my partner.
Sure, but I feel like my relationships are usually more private by default, like they're just between
Mhm.
us. And so even though I do tend to like date within my friend circles and within my communities, so of course we have a lot of mutual friends usually, I still feel like I would rather have the default be like, let's not share, because they don't necessarily know what is super private to me and what isn't, unless I
Mhm.
say, like, you know, you can totally tell this to your wife or whatever. But like, otherwise, I feel like it's not really their business. And so I think I just lean a little more like, and I'm really open, as you know, about a lot of things. Like, I'm very,
Mhm.
very open, too open for some people. And for my private relationships, I really like to keep those kind of like just between us unless we explicitly decide to do something else, you know?
It is interesting because for a lot of my relationships, I don't talk very much about my sex life with my other partners. And so that isn't really something that ever really comes up. But outside of the sexual sides of my relationships, I do feel like I talk a lot about the inner workings of my relationships with others
That's
and
interesting.
specifically with my other partners. Mostly, I also have a partner who is very compersive,
Hmm.
who
Yeah.
really enjoys compersion. If you aren't familiar with it, is finding joy in other people's joy. And usually polyamorous people will use that to mean joy in your other partner's joy regarding other relationships.
Right. Which is a nice thing to feel, but not always present. But even when there
Yeah.
is compersion, like I actually am more open about my sex life than about my romantic life.
So you and I are yin and yang.
Yeah, we're very opposite in a lot of ways, which I think makes us good co hosts. Yeah, I feel like I'm much more likely to talk to strangers about my sex life than I am to talk to my friends about my romantic relationship because it's just private for me. Like, I don't know. Like, but maybe that'll change and maybe it has changed. Like, I'm sure there have been times that I haven't been as, I don't know, secretive is the wrong word, but there's nothing to be secretive about. It's not like, you know, anyone's even cheating. It's just, it's just like, those are really intimate moments for me, you know, like, the
And I think
knowledge.
secret has a different
It
connotation
does, like a
than
negative
private.
one. Yeah. Yeah. Like hiding.
And it seems more like you kind of err on the side of privacy and
Yeah.
having privacy in those regards.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe I feel like emotional vulnerability is the deeper vulnerability in a way. And
Mm.
like, I feel pretty comfortable talking to strangers about sex, but I don't want to talk about my romantic relationships as much. So I don't know. Maybe the whole point of this should be that like it's a good thing to talk about at the beginning of a relationship, you know, like how like you tend to kind of be upfront about it, you know, and maybe I should be more clear in the beginning of my relationships and be like, hey, I consider most of the things that you say to me to be in confidence, you know? I want them to feel like they can speak freely with me and not worry that it's going to get around to anyone, like, or to our mutual friends or anything like that. And I'm not saying that, you know, more open people such as yourself are like lacking in any kind of discretion. Of course, that's not the case. You're a very discretionary person. Discreet. There we go.
You know, it is interesting because I run a group where sometimes it's important to be able to talk about my sexual history, or maybe somebody is asking me and I feel comfortable sharing information about my sexual history with other people. I err on the side of keeping it very vague as the time frame
Right.
of when I'm talking about
Yeah.
and the people involved so that it isn't really relevant who else was involved. It's more relevant about my experiences and my experience part of it
Sure.
that I can share and provide insight for other people without having to worry about sharing information about somebody else.
Right. Exactly. I think that, yeah, especially in polyamory, we do sometimes bump up against like, am I sharing about my life or mine and my partner's life? You know, because it is easy to, you could tell the whole dirty story, or you could just keep it to like one side and just give the important details. But I think it is one of those good things to like kind of negotiate a little bit, maybe in your dynamics. I'm all about explicit negotiation. So maybe just a good idea to be like, hey, you know, do you talk to your friends about such and such? do you, you know, do you show them these pictures? Like some people would think nothing of it, but I always try to check, like, you know, just to be sure. I would rather, yeah, err on the side of privacy, I guess.
Yeah. And, you know, obviously we're a polyamorous and ethical non-monogamy focused podcast.
Right.
And we're probably going to advise people, hey, maybe you should have an explicit conversation about this. Do you have any tips for people for what they might want to have that conversation be like, or anything that they might not consider otherwise? Because I learned about this through the normal method of relationships, learning about something. You screw up and you tell somebody, or you tell something to somebody that another person didn't want shared.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe asking like what kinds of things they consider to be more private, because like for you, you know, like for both of us, we have pretty different ideas about what we're more private about and what we're more open about. And that's okay. Everybody's different, but like not everybody's the same in that regard. So maybe checking with like, they're a sex worker, maybe they don't care about, you know, maybe they don't mind having their sexy pictures shared or online or wherever, like, you know, maybe they don't care who sees them. Or maybe that's like what they consider VIP access, like boyfriend only or whatever, you know, like, or boyfriend and paying clients and girlfriend or whatever, you know, so different levels of privacy. So I would probably say like, working with vague terms, try to be more clear with your partners about like, you know, when we talk about mental health, do you want me to keep those things private? When we talk about sex, do you want me to keep those things private? What about our power exchange relationship? Do you want me to keep those things private? To me, all those things are worth checking in with regarding like privacy.
Well, I think that was all great advice and information. Main takeaways, probably make sure you have an overt conversation, think through everything, and try to be cognizant of what's important to you to be kept private so that you can advocate for that for yourself, and be compassionate if somebody makes an honest mistake.
Yeah.
But try to hold firm to your boundaries.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool.
Please send in your requests to us, either record an audio message or audio memo on your phone, or send it to us in writing so that we can respond to these, because this is really fun and helpful.
Yeah.
I know for both you and I, we've been doing this for so long that it can be hard to remember what's difficult for people that are new to polyamory, or issues that are going on in your life. So if you share that with us, it helps key us off to know what might be helpful to you.
Definitely. After doing this, both of us for a decade plus, like it's, you know, we're like, you encounter different issues, I think, this far in than you do in your first few months of polyamory.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, we'll be right back with that second segment.
Ooh.
And up next, we have the third and final segment of Relationship Bill of Rights. We are back. Thanks everybody for joining us for another episode. We're continuing our third part of this series where we're talking about the Relationship Bill of Rights as discussed by More Than Two, available on their website. Last time, I'll have to warn you guys, the author of More Than Two has some issues in their past that has come to light. Me and others but still find that this Relationship Bill of Rights is a really great version of a Relationship Bill of Rights, and so we felt like it was still worthy of discussing. So we're back to discuss the last part, which is the Relationship Bill of Rights that is about what you have a right to in a poly network. So we talked before that poly networks are what some people call pods, some people call constellations, polycules. There are a lot of different names for it. It's the people that you date and who date the people you like and care about.
I'll take the first one.
Go for it.
Cool, because I have thoughts. All right. In a poly network, you have the right to choose the level of involvement and intimacy you want with your partner's other partners. This makes me think of a couple things. One.
Hold on. Let me put out the soapbox for you.
Oh,
there you go.
All right, thank you. Oh, all right. Stepping up. I'm only 5'2", so I need it. Great. I think this is an important one because there are definitely dynamics in which people feel like to date, you know, let's say I date someone new and they're like, oh, well, to date me, you really need to be good friends with my spouse as well. And I may not want to be, or may not have time or energy, or maybe we're not compatible as friends. Like I think it's important to remember that you're allowed to restrict access to yourself. You don't have to give access to yourself to everybody that wants it. And that includes family, that includes friends, that includes partners.
Yep.
Especially as an introvert and someone who, we talk a little bit about spoon theory sometimes, and just being like kind of a metaphor for energy, mental energy, physical energy. Not everybody has nobody has unlimited energy, right? We all have a limit somewhere. So it's important for me to guard that pretty fiercely. And I feel like it can be kind of manipulative for someone to say, to date me, you have to be best friends with my wife or whatever, like, because you can't dictate who I'm friends with. And, I don't want to be friends with everybody necessarily. So, I've had metamors that I have never met. I've had metamors that I was involved with in some way, whether it was, a physical relationship or just a close friendship or something, or maybe we lived together, Every dynamic is, of course, unique. And I think that the right to choose the level of involvement and intimacy you want with your partners is extremely important. Do you have thoughts to add to that?
Yeah, the way I do things, I am someone who I am very strong-willed, and I have this unfortunate tendency that if my partner tells me that I shouldn't date someone or it'd be a bad idea for me to date somebody, it makes me want to do it more. Doesn't mean I do, but it makes me want to do it more because it's like, no, I get like protective of that feeling I have about that person.
Yeah.
I want to be able to talk to the people that I date. I want to be able to talk to their partners, and I want my partners to feel comfortable talking to my other partners.
Yeah.
And that means I try to do all of the legwork I can to make that as easy and as available as possible.
I like that.
And so for me, it's a little bit of like a boundary where it kind of affects how I feel about somebody if they have a partner and I am not allowed to or can't have any sort of involvement with them. And so that plays into this, that like if I really feel like I need to have that freedom to be able to reach out to somebody directly and to have a casual relationship with them, that I do. That being said, one of my longest standing partners has a long standing partner and I just don't really get along. We butted heads early on in her and his relationship. And, I feel like if I really needed to reach out to him, I could. I've not ever really felt the need to. And so, and I would be confused if he reached out to me directly. I wouldn't be upset. I wouldn't react poorly because it's somebody very important to my partner.
Right.
But we just don't have that relationship. We're not buddy-buddy.
Right. I completely understand. And I do think that what you're bringing up is very important. And I would say that to me, it would be a red flag if I dated someone new and they said, oh, you can't talk to my spouse.
Yeah.
I'd be like, why? Are you hiding me from them? Are you not really openly polyamorous? Are you cheating? Because that would be my first thought. So,
and there are people out there that do don't ask, don't tell.
That's true.
I think you and I are both in the same boat where we don't date people who do don't ask, don't tells.
Yeah,
and
it's
that's because
not ideal.
I don't want to have somebody show up at my door asking why I'm with their partner.
Yeah. I think we both are of the opinion that open, honest ability to communicate is ideal.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the next point is that you have the right to be treated with courtesy. I think that's pretty straightforward and it'd be hard to argue with it.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like any dynamic, any relationship, family, friendship, romantic, sexual, should involve courtesy. What does courtesy mean to you, Kevin?
I'd be treated politely. And, we live in the South, somewhere that's technically the South, but not in a super Southern way. I want to be treated like I would want to treat people. And that tends to be with kindness and thoughtfulness. And we don't always have the ability to be as thoughtful as we would like to be. But I want to make sure that it's important to me if people make that effort.
Yeah.
To at least try.
Yeah. That's a good
to show me with their actions and their words that they respect me. Do you have any sort of different definition that you might use?
No. I'm glad you brought up the word respect because that's the first thing I thought of. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
So the next one.
All right. You have the right to seek compromise. That's an interesting one because so many of us come into polyamory with I think we've talked about this, like kind of a long list of rules and like hard limits and expectations. And in my experience, those tend to like soften up a little bit over the years once you become more confident and more understanding of your needs and desires. Would you say that's probably true?
Yeah.
But to seek compromise could mean a lot of things. I think negotiation is very important in relationships, and I enjoy it. It's kind of a kink. I think that compromise can be really healthy, but it can also be tricky. So I don't know. What are your experiences with maybe seeking compromise in a relationship, Kevin?
So I kind of wanted to zoom out a little bit on
Yeah.
a bigger scale, if you don't mind.
No, go
So,
for it.
we're talking about your rights in a poly network. And the one thing I like about this aspect of the Relationship Bill of Rights is it kind of recognizes the reality of our world and that nobody has the exact same set of values, wants, or needs. And seeking compromise can be a way for people who have differences in some of those areas to be able to still have happy, healthy, functioning relationships. I think in our culture generally, we're moving towards an area of an idea of like having a pure or ultimate sense of like you have to agree with everybody that you're close to on everything. And that can be unhealthy at times. It can create an echo chamber where things like racism, sexism, negative aspects of society can breed. And having people that challenge those viewpoints and seeking compromise can be a way of learning and understanding and bringing people together that might not otherwise be able to be together if you're trying to only associate with people that think and believe everything exactly as you do.
I think it's interesting that you bring up echo chambers, and this could be a whole separate discussion.
Yeah.
Because I think I have a lot of thoughts on this actually, but I'm not going to go into all of them. But I think that the polyamorous community, tends to lean very white.
Yep.
And very leftist. And those two categories of people, which I think we both fall into, have been accused of being echo chambers and seeking to create echo chambers often. And I think that compromise can have a dark side, because if I'm compromising with a racist relative, then maybe I'm exposing, my partners who are people of color to racism or something like that. So I think that, compromise needs to be done mindfully.
Yeah.
And certainly with your own limits and values in mind. But I do think that it is important, and I agree with you that it is valuable to seek and listen to other perspectives and experiences as long as they don't harm anyone. Is that fair?
Yep. Yeah. And, maybe you and I will have a larger discussion on this, because I think we could definitely have a lot of talk about like the nitty gritty of how a society moves forward from some of the issues that we see in, modern culture right now.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, that's kind of outside the scope of like how to have healthy relationships.
Sure.
That we can fit into a 15-minute segment on a podcast. So
yeah, definitely. Cool.
So the next aspect of what you have a right to in the poly network is to have a relationship with people and not with relationships.
What does that mean?
You and I have discussed this before when it comes to, people that are just starting to be polyamorous, that are dating as a couple.
Mm-hmm.
The general advice that I think you and I both have is you want to date the individuals that are in a relationship. You don't want to date the relationship itself, because the relationship itself isn't a person. It is a construct.
Right. And both are malleable. I mean, both can change. People change. People will change. People always change. Change is the only constant, which is super difficult for me. But, I think it's just a fact. And relationships also evolve because people evolve and needs, wants change. So, yeah, I agree. And dating couples was one of the first things that I thought of when I saw this bullet point, because sometimes people will try to fulfill their idea of what a relationship should look like, and they'll look for a person to fill that little hole in their mind or whatever. And I feel like that's not the best way to go about things. Making connections with people themselves as they actually are in reality is healthier, in my opinion.
Yep. It goes back to that previous part of the last episode. We talked about being able to have alone time with each of your partners.
Yes.
If you're only ever dating the two people together, your relationship is going to be different and, in my mind, less fulfilling because you're not going to be able to be with them individually. And that can really hamper your ability to connect and their ability to connect with you.
I agree. Yeah. Okay. Well, the next one is you have the right to have plans made with your partner be respected. For instance, not changed at the last minute for trivial reasons. That's a great one. I have seen and have, I guess, to a small degree, experienced relationships in which, especially maybe metamors, have tried to change or control my plans with my partners for their own reasons. And I'm an INTJ. I need a schedule. I need to know exactly what is happening. I need to know when you will arrive, how long we have together, and what the parameters are of that time spent together. So I completely agree with this one. I think that respect is important in any relationship, and my plans are a gift of time and energy to my partners and to myself.
Yeah.
And so I absolutely need those to be respected. And, not changed at the last minute for trivial reasons is a good addition to that because, of course, an emergency change is understandable. The first date I ever had with my spouse, like 11 years ago, had to be postponed by several weeks because his son was born. And that was a big deal at the time. So it was obviously a huge change. He was like, well, got to reschedule. And I was the new girl at the time. So it was like, fine. But yeah, so obviously emergencies and huge things like that are completely reasonable for change. But trivial things like, my spouse has decided that she's feeling insecure tonight, so I need to spend more time with her. I'm going to question how stable our dynamic is if that's occurring on a regular basis,
Yeah, one-time thing.
Yeah.
Probably wouldn't be a big deal for me. I have 3 hopefully short examples
Okay.
I wanted to provide.
Yeah.
I ended a relationship with somebody because consistently they were late or I had set aside a bunch of time.
Yeah.
And a quarter of the way through what I thought was going to be our allotted time, they had made other plans and left early.
Wow.
And, it was somebody that I really, really cared about and who
Yeah.
I still care deeply for, but
Aw.
just our expectations of what we wanted was very different.
Yeah.
The second instance was I was having a date night with my live-in partner at the time. I got a call from our other girlfriend. Both her and I dated this person individually. And it was her crying because she had fallen down the steps and really badly injured her shoulder.
Oh, no.
And didn't want to call for an ambulance because it wasn't that serious, but she could definitely not drive herself and needed a ride to the ER. So me and my partner packed up the whole time. She was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." We're like, you suffered a major injury. We're your
Yeah.
partners. We're here to help you. Stop apologizing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the third example was I had a date set up with one of my partners. I came home and water was coming out the side of my house.
Oh,
So I called her. I was like, I have to cancel.
yeah.
There's water exiting my house.
Yeah.
And, this is the same one who hurt her shoulder.
Aw.
And she was just very, very sweet and was like, "Hey, do you need anything? Do you want me to come over and help with anything?" I was like, "I'll get back to you on that. Right
Yeah.
now, I need to I'm in emergency mode."
Yes.
And I called her after I shut off the water to the house.
Yeah.
But man, those are my 3 short examples where there are times where plans have to change and it's okay to roll with the punches. But if it's a consistent problem, if the person isn't respecting your time and not being honest with you about what they're willing to commit to when you're making plans, that's a big deal for me, just like it is for you.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think you and I are probably both like structure people.
Yes.
And
I have a calendar.
yeah, oh yeah, me too. Live and die by that calendar. Both of my current partners are more chaotic and go with the flow type of people. And that's great, but I need certain parameters to be respected and they understand that. So, I think they would they don't even use Google Calendar the way I do. And, it's very different because they're just like, "Oh, we'll get there when we get there and, it'll be fine. We'll do whatever." And I'm like, "No, I need to know. I need an itinerary." So there's a compromise right there to talk about. Yeah.
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 So the last one is to be treated as a peer of every other person and not as a subordinate. And I think this is kind of pretty heavily covered in the other sections as well, individually. And you and I talked about having equal buy-in to rules, to have respect of your time and efforts and wanting to know what you're getting into. And I think all of that is a piece of that. Is there anything that you feel like that helps cover that is missed elsewhere?
You know, I do think that we should touch on the fact that some polyamorous relationships are structured in a way that discusses hierarchy, and some doesn't. There's relationship anarchy, which is a type of ethical non-monogamy, and that style is definitely more egalitarian, I would say. More like each individual relationship is respected as unique, individual, and equal to all others in the sense that no one has more power than anyone else. And I think that many types of ethical non-monogamy, including many types of polyamory, follow that. So, but there are some people who say, you know, this is my spouse, and that means that they have this kind of say in relationships in these ways. And I have been in situations where that's been healthy and where that's not been healthy. So yeah. I would say that that's one of those things you need to know pretty upfront. You know, if your spouse has such and such veto power and I don't because I'm your girlfriend, then I need to know that, you know? So I've been treated as a subordinate by metamors because I was the girlfriend and not the wife, and it was not healthy. And I think it's very important to know that you as an individual deserve respect and to be treated as an equal, as a peer, even if there is a hierarchy of some sort, you know, because it's about informed consent to me. Because, you know, up front, I need to know how much say I have, how much investment there is, how much, you know, all of that. So, yeah.
All great points. And, you know, you and I will probably have a discussion at some point in the future if it hasn't already been released as an episode. We don't tend to release these sequentially to when we record them. That, you know, there's definitely a long discussion to be had about entanglement versus hierarchy. And because I think there's a lot of nuance there that often gets lost in discussions around polyamory.
Yes.
But definitely, I think you definitely have the right to be treated as a peer of everybody, especially because of the way I do things. That doesn't mean that the person that isn't co-opted, that didn't help raise the children, suddenly gets full rights to your children out of nowhere within the first month of dating. That doesn't mean that you have the right to say, you guys need to stop paying your mortgage to help me. That does mean that, like you said, you have informed consent of what you have control over and what is and isn't allowed in your life. Yes. And you can always end a relationship. You can always walk away in ideal circumstances where there is not abuse or issues or income or instability in other ways. Like, so in most circumstances, you have every right to walk away from every relationship.
Yeah.
No matter the nature of it. Well, thank you, Elizabeth. I think we really got a lot covered in these 3 segments. Hope everybody is surviving out there, and we'll talk to you next time.
All right, thanks. You can find us on Twitter, through email, or on Reddit. To submit your questions or to recommend topics, please reach out to our contact info in the show notes.
This episode was edited by Jackson Menton. Music by Antilude. And logo designed by Carmen Bolding. Please share the Lesson 83 podcast with your friends. It would really help us out. Thank you.